Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you once again for tuning in, switching on, whatever the appropriate words are to use for attending a Facebook event. As I say, thank you. A pleasure as always to be with you. I'm here in very cold and very wet Melbourne, and I'm sure some of you have got much nicer weather than we're having today. Though I never complain about the weather, I quite like it. Whatever I get given, I'll make the most of it. I thought tonight I might go back in time and answer some of the many, many questions I've had with regard to characters in both The Tattooist of Auschwitz and Silke's journey. Those characters that I get asked, what happened to them? And is there any more information you can give me about them? I'm talking about the secondary characters in these stories. So how about we do that tonight? Let's talk about some of those people that you ask me about when I'm standing in front of you. And I think the first one I'm going to start with is Pepin. Pepin the Tatavera, the man, the Frenchman who gave Lottie the role of being his assistant and then disappeared. So many of you have asked what happened to him. The simple answer is we don't know. We don't know what his surname was. If Lottie said to me if he even remembered it, or if he even knew it, he didn't remember it. And of course you can't go searching archives where well over 1 million people went through this camp and with the name of Pepin. We did try, by the way, and no luck. What we did find were other references and testimonies to him. People mentioning that he had been the Tatavera, those Slovakian men and women who were the first Jewish prisoners into Auschwitz-Birkenau. Several of them mention him. And as I say in the book, he was a Frenchman and he was an academic and not a Jewish man. And it was his politics that had him sent to Auschwitz, not his religion. So with Pepin, I'm afraid I can't provide any further information about him. Now look, the same goes for Leon. And once again, we found other references to him being Leon and in a couple of places Leo. The N was dropped. Lolly called him Leon, so I called him Leon. But again, if Lolly ever knew his surname, he has forgotten it and we could not find him at all, even though once again we tried. So there are the two that I get asked the most about. Now there is a third character in Lolly's life in Birkenau and Auschwitz. His name is Jacob, or Jakob as Lolly called him. Now I do know a little bit more about him. A fascinating man, a fascinating story and what happened to him. What I can tell you is that he did survive Auschwitz. He returned to the US, where I believe he married, and he had 2 small children. His wife and the children and he moved to Israel, and there they tried to live a normal life. It would appear that was something that was just too much of a stretch for Jacob, and he did not fare well living in Israel. I believe he was actually charged with being a conspirator for the role that he had in Auschwitz. But no charges ever stuck for every person who accused him of being a collaborator, of being somebody who took the life of other Jewish prisoners. Many, many more people stepped forward and said, he saved many lives. And they spoke up for him and what he did. And so he was never officially ever convicted from what we can work out. But still, his life did not end happily and his marriage did not survive. And I believe he died quite a young man. I can say young man. When you're my age, everybody is a young man, but in his late 40s. And I think it was alcohol which finally he succumbed to, its abuse. So that's Jacob or Jakob. Survived, but didn't have the life that Lolly and many of the other survivors I met had in terms of being able to move on with their lives and put behind them, or not put behind them, but just live with the time that they spent in that terrible, evil place. So they're the three main people that I get asked about. Then, of course, there are the Roma, the gypsy people, as Lollie called them, and his relationship in particular with one. Now, that was a very real relationship to Lollie. To him, finding a race, a culture, a group of people for which he had never had any time for or been involved with in the past, and how he came to them and became part of their family because they let him become part of their family. They showed him that there was no room for prejudice at any time, particularly in the circumstances they were all surviving under. The day they took those 4,500 men, women and children, took them from the block where Lollie was with, that village, that area of the camp, the gypsy camp it was called, took them with Lollie protesting, "No, don't go, don't go." You know, he couldn't talk to me about that, with breaking down emotionally and physically. It left him an absolute mess, and I would need to spend quite some time reassuring him that there was nothing he could do. But like a lot of survivors, he always wondered, could I have done more? Should I have done more? Well, there was nothing he could do to save those families that he'd become so close to, and the one in particular, the one who reminded him of his mother. But he never forgot. And I guess that's what this is about, isn't it? And that's the message for us. Never forget. And hopefully it can be there never again. I just mentioned Lollie's mother. Of course she's in the book. Of course she's in his life. Let me tell you a little bit more about what he had to say about his mama, as he called her, when he would confess to me that I was a mama's boy. Yes, he was. He was the baby of the family, and he was a mama's boy. And he loved that title because to him, his mother was the most significant person in his life growing up. She taught him the value of being a good man, a man who would respect all women, starting with her and, of course, his sister. And that was the lesson that he took from her that he then carried on for the rest of his life. And maybe a little bit old-fashioned in today, but he also had that whole notion of not only do you respect, but you protect and you nurture, you do all these things to females, to women in your life, that yes, we still think that they apply. We just now say they apply to across the genders. Lottie was a little old-fashioned. We have to excuse him. Time and place, folks, time and place. But to his mother, the person who he would hide behind whenever he incurred the wrath of his father being a man who, he was a man of his time also, unemotional, worked so hard. To him, his role was just to be able to provide for his family, and so he never allowed any of that emotional, nurturing side of his personality come through into Lollie. But I guess his mama made up for it because he certainly had plenty of it. He had it in spades. So from a mother who clearly adored him and taught him right from wrong when it came to looking after others, not only females, particularly females though. This older sister who helped look after him and in some ways helped, raise him. She was the person who he would, walk to school with. She was the person who looked out for him. Whether he needed looking out for, that's another matter. It didn't matter. Goldie was there for him. His older brother, well, he was just somebody he admired incredibly. Okay, I have to admit, part of his admiration for him came from the fact that his brother was considered a very good-looking boy, he told me. And yeah, he had many of the local girls wanting to know him. And that was an aspect of him to which Lolly looked up to and admired. But again, he had his father's work ethic and his responsibility to his family. He married and he had two small children. Lolly had these two small nephews who he last saw. And so that was Lolly's background, and that is a little bit more about those people in his life, his family, and those other people in Auschwitz and in Birkenau that became part of his story. Of course, I should tell you some more about Goldie, only because Goldie was the one person who survived in his whole family. No cousins, no uncles, no aunties. There was no other family member that he was able to trace, except for Goldie. And to find her back in Krompaki when he returned, you know, whenever I read my own book, Lottie Story, I call it my book, but it's Lottie Story. Whenever I read that part about him finding Goldie, it absolutely breaks me. It's a small section in the book, but I think I've said it before, but I have to say it again. When you sit with somebody like Lolly and you see the toll it takes on them to tell you, and you listen to them and to their voice and you listen to what they're saying, and he's transported back to that day in Krompaki when the neighbour said to him, "Go and knock on the door, your sister's there." And when he's telling me that 60 years later, he's back there with all the emotion that came from finding his sister alive. Now, of course, he left Slovakia. He didn't return. All he could do when the situation changed in Slovakia and it was possible for Goldie to leave, he would fly her out to Australia. And that was how their relationship was able to continue up until her death. She died before he died. He bringing her to Australia. Neither one of them minded that, I'm told. For Goldie, a chance to come and see her little brother and the life that he had carved out for himself in a new country was extremely special and important to him and to her. So that's the family of Lolly and those others involved in his life in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now we'll throw in a couple of the ones who were involved in Gita's life in Auschwitz and Birkenau, and then I'll touch a little on her family as much as I know. Dana and Ivanka, her close friends, those girls who supported each other through nearly 3 years of hell. I've told many of you when I've been speaking that Dana is based on a lady called Lottie. Lottie lives in Sydney. She's 96 years of age. And Lolly introduced her to me way back when I was first meeting with him, and I would fly up to Sydney and spend time with her. And from Lottie, that's where I got all that lovely information and details about how it was for the girls. I didn't have Gita. I had Lottie, a more amazing, a wonderful, beautiful, beautiful person you could ever hope to meet. And I'm so privileged to have been able to spend time with her and hear her story. And how she was so welcoming to me and how much she shared with me. Because here's the thing, she and her husband also left Slovakia. Now initially they went to New Zealand and lived there, but then they came to Australia, and when they got to Australia, they of course, their friendship with Lottie and Gita was rekindled. And though while one lived in Sydney and one in Melbourne, they still took every opportunity they could to see each other and be in each other's lives. So that's Dana / Lottie, and that's probably why, if you look at the back of my book, when I'm telling you the little bit I can about people and how they survived, I don't mention her. That was just something she and I agreed on. We would change her name, but that's who she is based on. Ivanka, we do not know. Once again, she disappeared on the death march. It can be presumed that she did not survive it, as so many didn't. Now, before I go to Silke and the people in Silke, there's one more person I have to mention because you want to know about him. Um, yeah, look, I've never wanted to give him much airplay because he was a horrible, horrible, evil man. But to Lolly, he saved him on several occasions. And other than threatening him, he never carried out any of that evil on Lolly that Lolly witnessed him carrying out. And of course, that's Baretzky, Stefan Baretzky. His minder, this SS guard who Lolly described to me as just an uneducated oaf. I got his number, he said, the first day we met. I got to understand how ignorant he was and what it was he would talk about only. Now, Boretzky was an evil man. He was charged with war crimes, not at Nuremberg, but at Frankfurt in the early 1960s, I think it was 1961. And for somebody of a lowly rank like he was to be charged with war crimes, that kind of tells you folks that he was a horrible, evil person. Any of you who are interested in knowing more about him can actually read about him in the war trials because they are available and in their witnesses bear testimony to what they saw him carry out and yeah, what a nasty, nasty person he was. There is no excuse for his behaviour. There's no excuse for anyone's behaviour. None of them in that place. But when you go the extra yard, the extra mile, and you you carry out acts of cruelty above and beyond what your superiors expect of you, then you enter another category of evil. You know, Mengele is one of those, isn't he? I was going to use a swear word then, but I won't. But yeah, Boretzky's kind of in that same basket. Look him up if you want to. Now, what happened to him? Of course, he was charged, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. But he took the coward's way out, didn't he? He committed suicide. For him, he wasn't going to face the crimes that he'd committed, and he wasn't going to do his time. So that's what happened to Baretzky. This uneducated oaf, who Lolly called him, I think he came from a corner of Romania. And yes, he told Lolly he'd fled a brutal father and a bad childhood, but once again, that's no excuse. There are no excuses. I'm not going to talk about Mengele. He doesn't not deserve any more words from me. Once again, he's well known about, and now forget him, move on. He's not part of the story here. So from those characters, let me see, who have I missed out in Lottie's story that you asked me about? I think they're the main ones. There are, of course, some of the other sort of ancillary people. Aaron, what happened to Aaron? Once again, we don't know. And that's the thing you have to understand about this horrible place. It's not like a prison or the armed services or anything that we can relate to today, where documents are kept. Yeah, documents were kept, but a hell of a lot of them were destroyed too. In fact, the vast majority. So you can't go back and track down exactly what happened to everybody. And when they sent those tens of thousands of people out on death marches, they didn't sign them off as they went out of the gates and have somebody signing them in at Mauthausen or wherever they went. And so, yes, we lost track of them. There are archives, of course, and there's probably somewhere there may be a note about one of these people that we haven't found yet. Of course, that stands to reason. There could be survivors who could provide information for us. But accessing them, well, it's nigh on impossible. What happens is when people read Lottie Story, and then they do approach me and they do tell me storylines that contribute to Lottie's story. Oh, I'm trying to think. Shall I tell you about one of them in particular? Yeah, let me tell you about this one. You know, Lottie said to me many times how he changed the numbers on the arms. And I don't write that in the book, do I? I don't write about him changing numbers because I thought that's too far out there. I can't find any proof of you doing that. And if I put that in, I'm opening myself up to more accusations than have come my way anyway. But I was talking at a group one day, and a lady I suspect in her early to mid 50s, she came up to me and I was signing her book and she said to me, I am here because Lali the Tatavera and a brave man whose name I do not know. And I looked at her and I went, what? What do you mean? She said, the only reason I exist is because of Lali the Tatavera and a brave man whose name I do not know. I said, that's a really weird thing for you to be saying to me. Can you please stay back and talk to me? And she did. And she told me that her father had said those words to her and her brother all their lives, particularly when they were teenagers and making life difficult for the parents. And you remember, you are only here because of Lali the Tatavera and a brave man whose name I do not know. And she told me her father's story. And this was a story that Lali had told me many times of what he had done. Her father was a 17-year-old boy in Birkenau. He was in a block who were designated the next day not to go to work, but to go to the gas chamber. Yeah, when people had been in blocks for X number of months, it was considered that they were now too weak, too undernourished, too hopeless and useless to be able to work efficiently. And so with many, many others coming in, hundreds, thousands a day, well, they needed accommodation. And so they would just say, block 15, you're going to the gas chamber tomorrow. Her father, the 17-year-old boy, was in that particular one of those blocks. Lali came into him one day, singled him out and called him out. It was at the end of the day. He singled him out and he called him outside. And round the edge, at the back of the block or the side of the block, there was an older man, and she said he was an older man waiting there. And we think by older we mean somebody maybe in their 30s, not older, because they were never there in the first place. And that older man, Lali took this young 17-year-old boy up to, and he explained to him that this gentleman, whose name he did not know, had come to Lali and said, I am so sick, I am so weak, I will not survive. I know I cannot. Can you make my death count, make it matter? And what Lali did was what he said he did many times. He then changed the number, because you could tattoo on the front, on the top, or on the underside, or you could just work around the numbers. He changed and swapped those two men's number over. That older man, in his 30s, weak, sick, tired, went into that block and the next day went to his death. Lali took that 17-year-old boy and took him to the block where that man had come from. And that 17-year-old boy survived. He got out of not only Auschwitz, out of Europe. He survived, he had a family, and standing in front of me was his daughter. I am here today because of Lali the Tatavera and a brave man whose name I do not know. Amazing, isn't it? And this is the sort of storylines that are coming to me from other people about Lali and his role. And bring them on, that's what I say. But let's just quickly go to also Gita and her family. Her two older brothers, had joined the Slovakian partisan movement and had left home and gone to join up with the Russians and fight with the Russians, and they survived. So out of all of Gita's family, her two beloved brothers survived and lived to old age. Gita visited them several times back in Slovakia. So that is the family, as much as I learned from Lolly and what happened to them. Let me just now quickly go to Silke, because of course there are characters in her storyline that you now write to me and say, tell me about what happened to. Let's start with the most obvious one. Yelena. Was there a doctor who saved Silke's life, who got her a job working first as an administrator, but then trained her to become a nurse, and subsequently took her out of the hardship of the environs of Vorkuta and into a building each day to work? Yes, there was. Her name probably wasn't Yelena, because none of Silke's neighbors and friends knew what her name really was. They just knew about her. They told me what Silke had told them, which is what I wrote in terms of Yelena's storyline. But they also told me how Silke went to great lengths to find her after she got back to Slovakia and was living in Košice. And she did find her. And under communist rule, where you could not freely move about your own country, let alone go into another, Silke found her savior working in a hospital in Sochi in the Soviet Union. And she visited her there several times. She took the risk and got out of Slovakia and went into the Soviet Union to Sochi to see her savior. So yes, she did. Now, we tried to find who that doctor could be, and my researcher, she got as many documents as she could from Vorkuta and from the Moscow archives. But we found, I think there was about 30 female doctors. And so, of course, we couldn't work out which one was Yelena. We even went and looked at all the female doctors who worked in Sochi in the hospitals there between 1956, when Silke left Vorkuta, and I went to about 1970, but once again, so many names, it was impossible to actually trace which one it was. So yes, she really did exist, just had a different name. Now Josie, the young girl who has the baby, again, friends and neighbors told me how this young girl, and they couldn't remember their name. You've got to remember these people were people well into their 80s and 90s, and parts of their memory, of course, faded where it came to names, but not to the events and not to the storylines that Silke had shared with them. Now, they could tell me that to their knowledge, Silke was never able to find out what happened to her after she left Vorkuta. So I can shed no more light on that for you. So those are the two books and the characters within them that I get asked about and that I can respond to. If there is anyone else and you drop me a note, I can see some messages coming through. I'll go and look at them afterwards and once again try and reply to you offline or by messenger. I'm not up to being able to read these messages and these statements and these comments that are coming through and be able to then answer them. I'd be having my glasses on, glasses off, and that's not a good look, trust me. Now, of course, I'm not going to let you go without once again reminding you of what's coming up and, of course, my stories of hope. I really want to encourage anybody out there that has a story, a short story, a vignette, a half-pager about how something happened in their life, a family member's life, a friend's life, how something happened, but through that tragedy and trauma, something else then came along that gave them hope to go on. Why don't I just share one of the many that I've received? And it's not in the book, so I'm happy to share it with you. Because it's just crazy to think sometimes that some simple words that I wrote, given to me by a man, can have such an impact on people. I never anticipated that. I didn't see it happening. I just thought it was me that it happened to. and my family, but that was always coloured by the fact that we knew Lolly, and he was in our lives, and we have these amazing memories that we take with us forever. But one of the many emails I got last year was from a young girl, 15, and she wrote telling me how her brother, a 19-year-old boy in his second year of university, studying to be an engineer, was what the authorities called collateral damage in a drive-by shooting. He lost his life because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, no other reason. This young girl, 15, mature enough to be able to comprehend what it meant, but being the youngest and having her other family members, 2 other siblings and parents, all caught up in their own grief of having lost this beloved son and brother, they didn't kind of pull together, and she found herself giving up hope. That why bother living, she said to me. She stopped going to school, and even when her parents were contacted by the school authorities and to say, look, she's not coming, what's going on, her parents they too had given up hope and they didn't care. Whereas prior to that, these children getting an education like the older boy and going on to further education was something these parents had craved. A friend of hers gave her Lottie Story, and she read it. She wrote to me and she told me, I now have hope for a future. I have gone back to school because I now want to do all I can to be the best person I can. I have to live now, not only for myself, but for my brother and for anyone else like me who suffers collateral damage. Isn't that a horrible phrase, to think that we reduce somebody's life down to just those 2 words? But that was the words that were given to her. I was so thankful that she found the time and the bravery to write to me and tell me this. And she told it to me in a lot more detail with regard to her brother and his death. It wasn't immediate, by the way. Now, that is one story. It's a short story. If you've got one, you want to share it with me, with anyone, it needn't go any further than me, go to the website. Think about putting it down in words. Think about letting my publishers have a look at it and see about whether or not you want to take it further with their help and having it put on the website. I'd very much like that. I know they would. And if it helps you to put it in writing, then you go for it, guys. You go for it. Well, I think that's probably enough for me for one night. I got to tell you that I'm going to get to go from here, remove this lot of makeup, catch a few hours sleep, because at 4:30 my time in the morning I have to come back and sit in front of this laptop and have a chat on another live Facebook event into the UK. So I'm kind of looking forward to it, but they're not going to get the same kind of performance, okay, because I'm not a morning person. In fact, it's probably just as well I'm doing all the talking, because I know my family, they get told, don't talk to me in the morning. I'm a grumpy one. I'm a night guy. So it's all the same to you. I will get a few hours sleep and I'll say good night. And thank you. Thank you.